Okay, we are live for part 2 of the Climate Trails review. This is November I guess it's the 27th now, or is it 28th? What is the date? 2025. I went over the Climate Trails documentary. Part 1 was earlier today, and I just finished watching the rest of it. It didn't really add very much except for filler. Plenty of talk about things like HARP, weather modification, emotional appeals, a lot of pretty bad filler, though. I wasn't really impressed, and I almost feel like there's nothing we can really do about it. Like, I'm not trying to debate against the chemtrail believers any more than I'm trying to debate against climate change believers. And that's my main takeaway. My main takeaway here is that anti geoengineering is the equivalent to climate change. And if we're not going to sit here debating the climate change people, why would we waste our time sitting here debating the chemtrail geoengineering people? It's the same argument. And if they can't see that, well, that's why they're in the duopoly. That's why they're not taking the off-world stage perspective. And that's where they're likely going to remain. You know, we're talking about ingrained truth or orthodoxies going back decades. And I get a little pushback from people here and there when I talk about these things. For example, Jake the Awake, formerly Jake the Orifice, he used to be a regular listener and caller, and he broke up with us because I do not, well, not because I don't believe in chemtrails, because chemtrails don't exist, and I point this out. Because they don't exist. By the way, the screen is vertical. I know someone is complaining about it. You'll have to call restream.io, contact their customer service, and ask them what their issue is. Because I don't see any sort of setting here to make it go horizontal. I've been working on it. So, nothing I can do about that. But, at this point, the main thing is that we continue to really develop and outline what we're proposing here as far as this model for processing media. And that's the important thing, the ideas. We can worry about the special effects and the flashy graphics and the expensive studios, the golden mics, later. But right now, the important thing are the ideas. And right now, we're looking at the fact that the entire Trutherville commune is on lockdown. No one's leaving. There are people who are stuck in these orthodoxies who aren't going to break free. And that's fine. Again, I'm not trying to convince them. I'm not trying to engage in any kind of logical debate with people who have these holes in their mental immune system where they cannot process the fact that a loaded question has allowed a smuggled premise to alter their perspective into a very irrational conclusion. And if they don't have that insight, they're not going to gain it by having it confronted. When have you ever talked to somebody who believes in something and actually changed their mind? Beliefs aren't really affected by logic or reasons. These are emotional things. And I watched this documentary, and it's mostly emotional appeals. I was kind of startled. I just watched the end. They had this individual with the old man with the cowboy hat who claims that he watches chemtrail planes with this telescope, and they have special like holes in the back for spraying. And at the end, he breaks down in tears. He cries, and he says, "Please be actively compassionate like Jesus did, please." And he puts his head down, just weeping because of, he claims that chemtrails gave him cancer. And, for some time, I've been saying to people, if you really believe in this crap, you would go confront the pilots. Well, one of these expert witnesses from the documentary actually tracked a plane who was doing cloud seeding and went after the pilot. So what they've done here, and I've heard some people fall for this, they have conflated cloud seeding with chemtrails. And this is beyond apples and oranges. These are categorically two different claims, two different things. And to conflate the two is just the height of ignorance. And I've heard people do this, like, oh, you don't believe in cloud seeding? Well, what does that have to do with condensation trails? Nothing. And they continually use the word spray, which is 100% what I would consider to be a loaded, when they say, what are they spraying? It's a loaded question. But when they say spraying, it's a loaded term. It implies something is being injected. So they'll say stratospheric aerosol injection. That's dishonest. Stratospheric aerosol injection is a fancy way of saying condensation trail with the false assumption there's a spray. And why is it at the stratosphere? Temperature. The only reason why you have the trails of frozen, condensation, just ice trails, is because it's really cold up there. But I'm noticing here, it's really just the appeals to the ignorant and the, I guess, intentional misrepresentation of basic facts. And I knew it was getting bad towards the end. And I think this documentary was largely filler for money because they're starting to talk about revelation of the method. Someone in there, his name's Tanner, the flat earth millionaire. He's like, this is revelation of the method, describing how in the 1930s, somebody had invented fog machines. And this has something to do with chemtrails. And he said, it's the laws of the universe where if they tell us what they're doing, then they don't have to suffer negative karma. Again, I don't have the book where you can find the laws of the universe about karma and revelation of the method. It sounds like made up crap to me. Jamarian May says, in an effort to explain how time is accelerated, I inexplicably started to explain sun cycles, which leads to the infinite plane and all of this, to a religious NPC who chewed me out for challenging her. Right. Well, you have NPCs and alt NPCs, and NPCs go with the program, and religions are plugged into the world stage. They're plugged into the program, every one of them. And I'm trying not to get wrapped up in the religious thing very much because the main religion that we're talking about is media, which has supplanted the old religions. And there are people who want to, defend their faith, which I understand. But this is a think tank predicated on skepticism. So this is not the place to bring your faith if you don't want it to be challenged. But I'm open to challenging faith because if your faith is strong and it's really true and all that, well, then you should be willing to have it tested. Your feelings shouldn't get triggered. But I'm just pointing out here, after having watched this doc, so I was going to watch this documentary and I was going to do a point by point debunk of it. But now I'm realizing this is huge. This is on Amazon, and the entire anti-geoengineering movement is as well funded and as big as the climate change thing. It's the controlled opposition to it. There are, I believe, 33 states now where they have passed bills to block the non-existent phenomenon of weather modification. I mean, the term, I'm going to say weather modification, these terms are thrown around because they sound scary. HARP, Nexus radars. And I'm listening to these people and I'm like, wow, these are all claims that have been refuted for decades. So it's recycled agitprop. But the main thing about the documentary here is the emotional appeals. Like, don't you care about the children? We must unite. We must awaken humanity. And at the end, they're talking about how we all need to awaken as one. And when everybody sees the truth, we will stop the evil. And I'm like, why don't they have a single environmental scientist on their side? You can't say that all scientists are part of this conspiracy. So find me one environmental scientist straight out of college, somebody who's just got, the basic understanding of environmental science to confront this. If it's really the threat that these people say, if it's causing Alzheimer's and cancer, killing the crops, turning the skies gray, if it blotted out the sun, if we're all about to die because of what commercial airplanes are doing to us, why aren't there any environmental scientists on this task whatsoever? Not one. No, you have these babbling conspiracy theorists spouting pseudoscience, and badly at that, using emotional appeals to get people to care about a thing that's not even a real problem. I mean, it's totally phony. I thought the climate change people were kooky and ridiculous, but these chemtrail people are even worse, and their ignorance is astounding. Happy Thanksgiving, says Dawn. Thank you for joining. So I'm going to write probably a more extensive article on this. I took notes. I just finished watching it. It was excruciating. And I'm not saying that because I disagree with it. It was just a poorly made documentary, which tells me that Amazon will publish anything. And I don't know if I want to hear people complain anymore about AI slop when there's so much human slop getting a pass. Jamarian May says, any belief system is a limitation of perception. Yes, that's a valid point, because we make the distinction here between beliefs and knowledge. Like, do you know something, or have you accepted an explanation to fill in the gaps in your knowledge? And most beliefs in this context are filling in for gaps in knowledge. And a false belief does in fact limit, well, by the way of it incentivizes continued research, it does sort of limit your perceptions. Like, oh, I've got the answer, no need to look any further. And you'll find that believers defend those beliefs, especially if they're beliefs that they picked up in the context of something highly emotional. And believers also falsely assume they have the moral high ground, because to be a believer is to cede the intellectual high ground. Like, I don't have reasons to believe this. I can't logically back my claims, but my heart's in it. Okay, well, you have this emotional basis for your belief, and you think based on that you've got a moral high ground, because beliefs are all somehow considered to be sacred, but they're not. A lot of them are just fundamentally wrong. And we shouldn't feel bad about calling out bad or wrong beliefs as such. Do we have to lie to protect the feelings of the believers? No. Non-believers have always been reviled. Religions have always hated the non-believers. And what we're dealing with here is religiosity in the context of mass media. Man at the Perspective says, it's a great psyop. It doesn't cost anything. All they have to do is tell a scary story, and it's very effective. It depresses people more than most psyops. Well, it really does. And I've seen it work, where people do see lines in the sky and they just feel powerless. Like, look, we're being poisoned. And that's how they're describing it. But these guys are liars. So they're acting like they're crusading for human rights. They want to save the environment. They want to save us. So we're supposed to look at these chemtrail activists as the good guys. But no, they're a bunch of liars. They're lying to themselves. They're spreading lies. And you can say, well, they don't know any better. I don't care. They're ignorantly spreading lies, or they're consciously doing it, or they're grifters, which is what I would say. But no, they're 100% lying about what we're observing. So do we give that a pass because they believe it so much? I don't think so. If you're willing to say that Greta Thunberg and Al Gore and all the climate change people are liars, are agitprop, which is what we're talking about, propaganda designed to agitate people, purveyors of agitprop, then why shouldn't we have the same standards? So we can't have a double standard for truthers. For a long time, truthers have assumed the moral high ground because the media is the liars, and The conspiracy theorists are the truthers. You see how that works? Like, oh, we're the truthers. Well, I don't know about that, because the truthers are purveyors of lies. Point to me any truth or orthodoxy that's not fundamentally false. And they've been spreading these things for decades. So at some point, they should be responsible for being a bunch of liars. So I'm going through my comments, and I got this comment, which was really saying, can we judge people for being in their own little boxes? Can we judge people for being in a reality tunnel where they're unwittingly spreading lies? And I'm saying, yeah. If you think we can't, or if you're not willing to, what is your basis? Is the basis that all beliefs are sacred? I don't understand that, actually. It doesn't make sense. Like, maybe knowledge should be sacred, verifiable, testable knowledge. But why should misinformation be held as sacred or special just because the person hasn't put a lot of thought into it? Like, we need to stop with this anti-intellectualism. And this is why we need a third platform. The alt and the mainstream media will not platform our perspective. And are we not correct in our assessment of these events? Like, I would say that we are. We have more reasons to say so than those who buy into the mainstream and alternative. So it's important to stand on that and not treat all opinions as equal, because they're not equal. And we can't claim to stand by that if we don't say that the mainstream people have just as valid an opinion as anybody else. No, mainstream NPCs and alt media NPCs are two variants of the same, and they're both wrong. And neither of them have the moral high ground if what they're promulgating and perpetuating is psychological warfare. Unless you think that psychological warfare gets a pass. And I don't think so. We need to stop standing up for ignorance or being apologists for ignorance. We have to have some kind of standards. Like, there is such a thing as correct and incorrect answers aren't as good as correct answers. And I've noticed this tendency in Trutherville to try to impose this type of relativism where facts don't really matter, everything's subjective, we all live in our own subjective universes. Well, no, we don't. And it's funny how the subjectivists don't like our opinion. Like, oh, we all live in our own universes, but you guys have an objective opinion. We don't like that one. Funny how that works. But anyway, the documentary Climate Trails is mostly just emotional appeals. Everybody cries at some point. I'm curious as to why there's no environmental scientists who are looking into it whatsoever. And a lot of it comes off as kind of off the cuff and unscripted, which is, I think, his technique. I've watched his other documentaries, Hibbler Productions, and what I think he does is he sits down to interview these people and he asks questions and gets their answers, and then he just edits together all of their answers. And so their answers come off as word salady, disconnected, and made up on the spot, which is what they're essentially doing. And I get it. It seems conversational in a way. It's his technique. But the people who are speaking extemporaneously about these things are obviously bullshitting. It's filler. Jamarian says, can you provide an insight into the 9 angles of the 764 cults? I would check in Perplexity and check in all the sources. I'm looking into it. I'm still not convinced that it's real. You know, it's like with the various hate groups, these things seem to be creations of the PSYOP entertainment complex. And even the Temple of Satan isn't even real. They admit this. It's a liberal activist group cosplaying. Like, they're not even real in terms of they don't believe in Satan. They're just trying to offend Christians. You know, the guys with the Baphomet statue with the children, which in itself is a weird thing to have because the Baphomet statue never had children before. So the Michigan statute is what I'm referring to. So obviously it's building up, I think, this idea of the satanic panic, which is why they have the new version of the mass shooter are all left-wing satanic shooters killing children. That's been the theme really since 2022, and it was foreshadowed in Stranger Things. Stranger Things has a lot of overlap with these mass shootings since 2022. And I know the first few episodes just dropped tonight. I considered watching them just to see where we're at. This morning we were talking about that South Park episode that had Charlie Kirk. And if you watch the clip I posted on Twitter, it's in Discord. I didn't even see it. I just noted it because it seemed to put Charlie Kirk into the view of the public right before the event. But there's the scene in South Park where the Charlie Kirk-esque character is knocked off his stool and he falls to the left, just like Charlie did in real life. So just another example here of how what we had already identified as predictive programming has even more significance because the actual scene itself reflects what happened in real life. But it's futile. It's futile. And I've been saying before, we don't want to build bridges. We don't want to have representations of every belief system in our think tank. This isn't DEI. We don't think that all opinions are valid. Not all perspectives are valid. It is possible to be wrong, and we have to accept this. Mainstream is wrong because their perspective rests upon an edifice of observable, demonstrable fakery. News that has been modified because of its interaction with simulated events, treating simulated events as real, and resting upon a lot of unmitigated, uncorrected fakery. So the mainstream perspective is going to always be subjective, and it's going to be coming from a place of falsehood. Like the Truman Show is a real thing. We're in it. And what we're doing here is we're recognizing that the alternative to that, the fake awake, are in no way exiting their container. And so we don't need to build a bridge. We don't need to be inclusive. So if you're still a believer in chemtrails, stay in Trutherville, because we want there to be a greater distinction between alt media and what we are, because we are the newly emerged third perspective and we're platforming it. And I have plans, I have a strategy here for enlarging this on the premises that we establish. And so we don't want to be open to those who don't uphold our standards of evidence. Like if you do find chemtrail theory convincing, then good for you, but you're not going to have a seat at our table. And the reason why is that by having accepted such a belief, you demonstrate vulnerabilities in your critical thinking when it comes to media, that there's certain holes in your thinking that apparently you're not willing to patch up. And so as a way of, I think, maybe offering a little bit of advice here, I suggested that maybe look into the loaded question fallacy, faulty causality, and try to reverse engineer this. That's why I have the book, The Chemtrail Hoax, which I'm updating right now, just to explain the flaws in the thinking that could get somebody to believe in this set of propositions. But if someone's not willing to revise their own thinking and admit that they're wrong, then they're not going to get out of Trutherville. So we talk about guardrails. One of the primary guardrails keeping people in the sheep pen is the bloody one, where their base assumption that people die in psyops is their limiting factor. Well, the ego is also a limiting factor. If you cannot admit that you're wrong and you can't backtrack on something and kind of reverse engineer it and move beyond it, yeah, then your ego is going to hold you in place. And that's where a lot of people are also held in check. Linda Curtis says, I think the Baphomet eating children is a metaphor for the system absorbing the minds of their kids. Well, he's not eating the children, he's befriending them. It's the Saturn eating the child, Kronos. And the Baphomet is not even a like a god or an entity. It's a like a totem. It was never like considered to be a god in the sense that there's myths and it existed. No, it's actually a pile of things just stacked on top of each other. Animal, man, angel. And if you break it down, it's actually kind of profound because what it suggests here is that man is between beast and angel, and that how one orients oneself in this to be balanced would mean putting the spirit above the beast. And if you look at the angel wings, the torch between the horns, it's a symbol of the soul properly balanced between these extremes. It's not the same as the devil. It just looks kind of, I guess, devilish because it's got the goat head, which is a common thing with the horned gods, the nature gods, which even then weren't really devils until the modern concept of the devil was kind of coalesced into this idea that you have this horned evil figure, which isn't even, I don't think, all that accurate biblically. I mean, wasn't Satan considered to be a beautiful angel? Jamarian May says, is there any occult significance to Black Friday? They usually encode darkness in these energetic holidays. Interesting question. Oh, by the way, the news that broke today was this shooting of the National Guardsman in D.C. Now, what's interesting about this is the shooter's he's an Afghan national. So the talk here is that it's a terrorist attack. Apparently, he was shouting Allah Akbar while he was shooting people. These National Guardsmen, they were saying it was targeted. Well, what did we say after Dick Cheney died? So Dick Cheney dies on the 3rd, which is the date the One World Trade Tower opened, the one that replaced the twins. So Dick Cheney, architect of 9/11, dies. The next day, UPS flight 2976 crashes in Kentucky. And we were describing how that UPS flight has the same number as the number of 9/11 deaths, according to the history. And so I said, this thing is 9/11 coded. It went up 175 feet, flight 175, crashes into a building. Following the wake of Cheney's death, I thought this is highly significant. And I jokingly said that this was some kind of a 9/11 themed Viking send-off for the architect of 9/11. So as we're looking at this event and how it has this 9/11 tinge to it, other things begin occurring. The mayor of New York, according to the right, is a radical Islamic terrorist. He gets elected. That's all hyperbole, but you see the buildup. So you have a lot of 9/11 imagery flooding the internet. Rudy Giuliani on down. They're all pushing this idea that you just put a terrorist in office. And so the 9/11 stuff follows the plane crash and Dick Cheney's death. So these things aren't connected. One is a plane crash, one is a death of a former vice president, and then the other is a mayor getting elected. But if you look at the media ecosystem holistically, it was all connected. Then you had thousands of FAA airplane flights being grounded, just like after 9/11. You had white powder terror attacks at some Air Force base. There's a car exploding in the Bronx. 5 firemen are injured. So things are getting very 9/11-y, as we were describing on 11/4 and 11/5. As the beginning of the month was moving forward, we were noticing what's with all the 9/11 themed stories. Then you have some UFC fight 322 in Madison Square Garden, and the fighter who wins, his name is Islam. So Islam wins in New York after the mayor gets elected. So you see this buildup with 9/11 themed content. And someone said, well, what's the point of this? And I said, well, they're probably setting us up for a terror attack. So they're bringing in all these 9/11 recalls into our psyches right now so that we have terrorism on our minds when they do something. That was kind of what our thinking was. This has got to be predictive programming. So now fast forward to this event and we have a terror attack, and all the people who are panicking about the mayor of New York are bringing this up, that this is an Islamic attack right before a holiday. And then I'm looking on the news, and in Hong Kong, there's this massive fire in this building where it looks very 9/11-y. This downtown scene, burning buildings, Muslim attack. So we're seeing, I think it all comes kind of full circle, where it looks to me like Cheney's death precipitated a lot of 9/11 agitprop in advance of what we're seeing right now. And I don't think we're incorrect in connecting these things, because the idea here is that the predictive content sets the stage for what they're going to simulate in the news. Sort of like putting a Charlie Kirk character on South Park, where he gets knocked off the stool while answering a question. So now on the screen here, I've got a little timeline I put here. This is how I'm framing things, because we're not just talking about predictive content, which is part of it, a huge part of it. It's every single fake event has certain features. One of them is they're preceded by entertainment propaganda that reinforce it, that actually advertise it, like product placement. Then you have the real-time content that reinforces it, the concurrent programming. And then you have the reinforcement, where the way it's talked about in the media echo chambers reinforces the essential reality of the event. So predictive, concurrent, reinforcement, past, present, future. And then to that you can add history, news, and then meta-scripted events. So the final category here refers to events that are planned in advance, the so-called PSYOPs. Well, a PSYOP isn't just the event that happens on the day it's reported. It's also reinforced. It's added into our historical narratives. It's part of our timeline. So you can look at these influence operations not as mere PR stunts to affect a news cycle, but these are simulated historical events. And these simulated historical events are planned in advance, I would say, for the purposes of control over our mass worldview by controlling history. It's time control. But my point is, these events are scripted and scheduled and planned in advance. So they're in the future. There is a set of events planned out into our future that we're all going to live through and experience, internalize, we're going to process it. And we're being programmed for these things right now. That's why we look at the media ecosystem to see what kind of ideas, what themes, what scenes and scenarios are being projected into people's minds right now in 2025. As we get towards the end of the year, what are we being set up to expect, so we can extrapolate from this? What's going to happen in a few months? What's going to happen next year? So looking at the beginning of the month, from Dick Cheney's death and the days following after, you could say it looks like they've rebooted a lot of 9/11 themed content. What is this going to lead to? Are they setting us up for another Islamic terror attack? So now we have a psyop involving an Islamic terrorist screaming Allah Akbar and shooting National Guard. And now they're adding National Guard soldiers to DC. So to me, this looks like a classic example of predictive and concurrent programming, just setting people up for something that was pre-scheduled. And given the fact that what we're seeing today seems to have been predicted by what just happened, I would argue that that is a hoax indicator. So I have no reason to think that the National Guardsmen were actually killed. I'm suggesting it was fake, just based on that. But what I'm really trying to hammer down here is the fact that when we're talking about simulated historical events, whatever type they are, the fact that they're planned in advance means that we can place these in the future. So we have a timeline, Every day is news. Yesterday is history, and history goes back. But the future is premeditated. We're living through a predetermined set of events. And this is a significant paradigm shift from how people process media and how they accept history as objectively true. And this is why we need the breakaway. Because the people who are still caught up in the establishment friendly, Amazon friendly conspiracy theories aren't here. Like, they don't see this, they wouldn't process this. They're still stuck in the old paradigm. And there's really no bridge between them and us any more than there is between the mainstream and what we're proposing. So the off-world stage perspective is distinct from the mainstream and alternative, who are in fact in the same category. And this has been made abundantly clear with this documentary, that the truther community aren't gradually becoming more informed, more media savvy, smarter about things. Not at all. They're actually just repeating cliches, and it hasn't improved. There's no new research, no new facts, no expanded understandings of these various conspiracy theories. No, they're just repeating these things. They're not adding to it. There's no systematic research, no rigor applied to their observations. So there's a lot of people in this group who will say, well, that event's fake, this is hoaxed, but they haven't really put it into the context. And so that's what we're doing here, is we're noting the fake events and we're putting them onto the timeline. And we're noting that the fake news events going back into history are not corrected. There's no adjustments being made. There's no, like within media, there's no, oh, we were wrong about these events, these didn't actually happen. No, these things aren't corrected. They're set in stone. Busy says, Tim, in that same South Park, before he gets knocked out of the chair, he's telling somebody about God made man and woman, like an anti-trans thing. And before CK was shot, he was talking about trans shooters. See, that's good. That's actually pretty solid, because if you look at the narrative here, the irony was he was talking about shootings when he was shot, but the shooter was Antifa with the trans furry relationship. So that was built into it, just like the shooter for the Annunciation School, and that one being associated with weapons. I mean, we need to go back into these recent spate of shootings and how they're all characterized as non-binary, Reddit radicalized Antifas. So there you have another layer to it, though. So now you have South Park as predictive content, episode 330, by the way. Add to it, he's knocked out of the chair. And now the question that he was, or the comment he was making as he was knocked out of the chair, specifically relates to the shooting itself. And we're way past the point of saying that's just a coincidence. Oh, that doesn't look like anything to me. We don't have Westworld syndrome here, because we're not caught in a loop. We're not looking at every day's news cycle as brand new, but we recognize that, no, this is part of a continuous series of fake events superimposed over the organic timeline. So I'm not saying reality's fake. We're not making these metaphysical claims. Like, obviously, there's past, present, future. We're living through it. We're experiencing it. However, there's also an alternative timeline superimposed over ours. This is the worldview curation done by media, where selective focus and simulated events inform us more than just the objective reality, where they've taken us into subjectivity. But yeah, great comment, Busy 56. I'm gonna have to watch that episode now. I don't like South Park. I just find it really hard on the eyes, but I might have to go and watch that clip. I should have, but I'm glad that you did, because again, we already made the point with it, that the significance of it was blasting him out there prior to the event. But now add to it the comments he was making and getting knocked off the chair. Again, beyond coincidence. But the go-to explanation for people who haven't put this together is it must be a simulation, or it must just be an extreme coincidence. But we've been noting these things for so long. In fact, we predict these things. There's predictability built into our model for assessing media, which basically means that if the event is fake, it's going to have these features. And one of the features is relevant concurrent programming. It's going to be mirrored in the entertainment in ways that the media will describe as uncanny, eerie, ironic. And this is template. And it goes with any fake event, not just terror attacks and shootings. I mean, we had that international news story about the crown jewels being stolen, and we're like, well, what does that mean? You know, why is this being blasted? Is this thing fake? Well, let's take a look. And sure enough, as Inside Edition and other agencies noticed, I mean, the media sometimes notices these things, that the crown jewels being stolen coincided with Netflix Lupin about a thief breaking into the Louvre and stealing Marie Antoinette's necklace. So both of these things, the necklace being stolen, the crown jewels being stolen, correspond perfectly to the concurrent protests going on. No kings, crown jewels stolen, Marie Antoinette lost her head during the No Kings protest, her necklace being stolen. So here you have the political stage, the protests with Netflix, and then the so-called real event of the crown jewels being stolen. All of it also correlating with things happening that we had noted here with the symbol of the crown. It's actually quite extensive, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. I'm saying it's a hoax indicator. So if you were wondering, well, was the crown jewels theft real? Well, given the fact that it was attended by concurrent programming in multiple contexts, no, that reduces the possibility of it being real to basically zero. Reality doesn't have perfect counterparts, coordinated releases in media like Netflix when on a routinely predictable basis. Like, I could understand maybe once in a while it could happen. I haven't seen any examples. I'm open to it. Show me an example of something happening in real life that has an eerily correspondence to Netflix or Hulu or a major movie release. And the reason why this happens is perfectly explainable when you recognize that mainstream entertainment is actually propaganda. And the purpose of propaganda in this context is to reinforce what the news media is propagating. So the entertainment propaganda is reinforcement, supplemental. And it has been the pattern as long as we have looked at this. And what's fascinating is many truthers for years since 9/11 have noticed that you frequently have drills perfectly corresponding with fake events. So this is a normal thing. If the event is fake, there's going to be drills alongside it. So it's not hard to understand, okay, well, media is working with government because these fake staged events are correlating with Department of Homeland Security events. I mean, you wonder, how do they get all the people out of the towers? How do you prevent people from witnessing these things? Well, the drills create closed movie sets. And there's so many examples of this that have been observed. But then we bring up, well, not only do you have drills that correspond with these staged events, again, these are staged, historically significant events, but the entertainment's doing it too. And this is one of the big secrets, because the people who are willing to call the events fake don't want to acknowledge that entertainment is part of the picture, that these movie directors have been co-opted to provide content to reinforce fake events. And I've gotten more pushback from that proposition than anything else. And it's coming from truthers. It's coming from red pill truthers who consider these events fake, but they don't want to, for some reason, confront the fact that the entertainment is actually part of the government and that they're all serving the singular objective of manufacturing worldview on a daily basis in a way that creates a monopoly tantamount to a totalitarianism, I would say, like a one world religion has been, in fact, instituted. Jamarian May says, have you seen these new pranks people are pulling off? They capture an image of someone, process them doing something screwed up in an AI video, and show them the video. I have not seen that, but what I have seen, and I mean, this is kind of funny too, where people are recording the inside of their friends' homes, and then later they insert a homeless person into the scene. Like, you know, so it's like your home security camera footage has a homeless person in your living room, and they send that to the homeowners, and the homeowners are calling the cops. Hey, I'm looking at my CCTV and there's a homeless person in my house. But that's where we're at. And that's why what we're doing is useful. You could say it's critically important. It depends. I mean, the system is just going through a new iteration. It's accounting for the ability for people to communicate and possibly unravel it. I think it's overcoming that, actually. The ability to fake anything at the scale that they do now is this unprecedented new power that world government has. You will no longer be able to call things fake because they look fake, because they won't look fake. So what we're doing is we're proffering a perspective that is outside of their control paradigm. And from our perspective, it's possible, it's actually easy and routine now, it's possible to discern real from fake because we're not solely reliant on the visual aspects of these events. We don't need visual deconstruction to know this event or that event is simulated. No, at this point, we do it based on a wider array of information, a wider context. But if you don't have that broader context, you're pretty much screwed. You got the hoodwink on. You have the wool pulled over your eyes, the black screen. So which side of the screen are you on? And that's a valid question. If the opinions that you espouse align with Wikipedia's version of things or ChatGPT's version of things, then you're on the other side of the screen. Your nose is pressed up against the black mirror, and it overrides your perceptions. That's the very definition of gaslighting. So gaslighting, as you all understand, it's a form of manipulation and lying, but specifically, you get the person to doubt their perceptions and rely on what you say because they lose confidence in their own perceptions. That's what gaslighting means. So if people are confused, and this is why I call out people who say, I'm confused, I don't know if that's real or fake. Well, if you don't know by now, that means that you've been gaslit to the point where you cannot trust your own perceptions. Like, I don't know if Charlie Kirk's alive or dead. You might think that's a valid statement that makes it seem like you're somehow objective and you're open-minded. No, it means that you're gaslit and you cannot arrive at a conclusion without Big Brother holding your hand. That if it's not on the black screen, you don't know whether or not to believe it. And so now your default is it might be fake, but I'm still on the other side of the screen where these things are assumed to be real. So that kind of ambiguity is not a sign of somebody with a better grasp on things. No, it's a sign of not just intellectual impotence and an admission of that, but it's also a sign that you have been experiencing gaslighting to the point where you've lost confidence in your ability to formulate opinions based on your own perceptions. So I'm really against confusion and ambiguity. There's no reason to be confused about the nature of what we're getting through media at this point. There's enough information to arrive at a rational conclusion. And the rational conclusion is informed disbelief, and the information that leads us to disbelieve these various events, it informs us about the nature of media and what media actually does. If you think that the news media is out there competing to inform you so that you could be the most informed, that's not what they're doing. That's actually kind of a naive take. They're not objective, and we understand that there's bias, but beyond bias, no, their objective is world view confirmation. They're conforming you to something that's predetermined. And not everyone in media is involved in this overtly or openly or knowingly, and you wouldn't have to be. The minority of events that are simulated historic events only require a small subset of media to be involved. The rest of them just react to it. So if you look at the breakdown of predictive concurrent reinforcement programming, well, the reinforcement programming can be done by anybody not in the know, that is. You don't have to be in the know about the event being fake to be part of the programming process of reinforcing it as real. And by doing so, you're cementing this fake event as essentially a real thing. That's why I suggest fake until proven real should be your approach. If you're not approaching things with that, then you don't know what media is. But again, to get back to my point about climate trails and truthers in general, they don't know what media is. They think alt media is where truth is and mainstream is lies. And that simplistic take is a major limiting factor. And again, we don't need to convert or convince. I say leave them to it. When I say we are engaging in deprogramming, it's an active process. You can't just say, I'm awake. Oh, I'm awake now. No, you're not. It's an ongoing process. We have a better understanding of things now than we did a couple of years ago. But the deprogramming refers to disengaging from the prefabricated events, not just of the present, like, oh, I'm aware of the news, it's going to fake things, I'm not going to believe the next thing until I have evidence, but also disengaging from all the past fake events and being aware of the agenda here, because again, we're talking about not only news bending, but history bending, which is the proactive manipulation of history. So to be deprogrammed is to be aware of the program, which consists of the sequence of fake events, past, present, and future. So there's two timelines that we're looking at. The real one that we're living through physically, and the one that is the psychological simulation, the internalizable mental version of things. But that does also have a timeline, past, present, future. But past fake events, present fake events, and scheduled future fake events that haven't happened yet that we're being prepared for. And the big reveal, and again, the majority of alt media people will not get this, and they will not understand the significance of it. These significant historic events that are planned in advance are planned in advance by decades. I mean, there might be smaller events that might have 5 years of planning. I don't know. But the major significant ones, yeah, we're backdating the script, the original script that these things are based upon, decades before the event. I mean, the Charlie Kirk thing really opened my eyes to this facet of it. Like, I knew it before. I recognized it with certain events, but I hadn't really considered the deeper implications of it until just a couple months ago. And this, to me, is going to be that major stumbling block that's going to keep a lot of people programmed. They're going to still go with the program because they recognize, yeah, they're faking some events in the news, but they're not looking at the timeline of it, the accumulation of fake news going back decades that never see corrections that go into the history books, but then also, more significantly, the fact that our future has pre-planned fake events already lined up for us. So the reason why this is a perspective shift is now it raises a lot of significant questions about the nature of pretty much everything, specifically politics, how rigged everything is. And this is not cynicism. This is just being a realist. And as a realist, looking at this from this perspective, I'm disengaged from fake news. I don't react to atrocities, terror attacks. None of these things get a reaction out of me. But this also has me disengaging from the need to seek solutions from political leadership. Why do you need, like, for example, we got to vote for Donald Trump because he's going to save us from the deep state. Well, if the deep state's a hoax, did you need him to save you? Do you need political saviors? Like, what is it that you're actually voting for? And even if you believe in the system, you're voting for people who believe the fictions as real. So you're dealing with the reality compromised. But this also leads me to conclude here that, at least in part, politics is mostly a steam valve. It's there to give us an illusion of control. What's up, Dark Ghost Wind says, people are prone to their own biases. They choose what is real and what isn't. Well, we say this, and that's true, but why isn't that true for any of us? This is an interesting question. Like, what holds them back? And what I'm saying is, like, I'm not special. There's nothing different about me that causes me to have the discernment to see between real and fake. So what is it that holds them back? And what I've been noticing here is that it's actually a series of what I call guardrails. So the reason why normies don't go into Trutherville is they have certain guardrails in place. And within Trutherville, there are also guardrails in place that prevent them from going off-world stage. And the main guardrail is the mistaken belief that people are being killed in psyops. If you think people die in psyops, what is your reason? And the only reason I ever get from people is because the bad guys are so bad, why wouldn't they kill people? Which is an appeal to motive fallacy. But when it comes to evidence, there isn't any. And I want to reiterate here that we are correct. The facts are on our side. And when we say nobody died, nobody cried, that applies to all these events. I mean, look at Charlie Kirk and Erica Kirk. Nobody died, nobody cried. You can see it. Like, this is theater. When we say nobody cried, we're talking about how they have to have fake mourning. They have to simulate these things. But the idea that people died and people's feelings are hurt and people are crying, these are emotional appeals that get people to refrain from questioning the integrity of the event because it's considered to be mean or cruel or wrong to question grief or to minimize the violence and call it fake. No, we have to react to it as though it's real. And I'm saying, no, I don't think you have to. And the reason people don't is that they don't want to be perceived as cold or irreverent. But when you really think about it, that's a false moral high ground. Because if you say, well, we can't question this because people died, well, you're actually now on the side of the PSYOP entertainment complex. Look, if their objective is, let's convince people these children all died in this school, and let's use this to advance a political agenda. Okay, well, we could describe that as atrocity propaganda. We're calling it such, and we're distancing ourselves from it. Other people are saying, no, it's real. They're responding to it. Well, who has the moral high ground? The people who say it's real or the people who are calling it fake? Well, if we're talking about here is atrocity propaganda and psychological warfare, it's the non-believers who are diffusing it who have the moral high ground. So in addition to being right, we have the moral high ground over those who want to dispute what we're saying. And you cannot dispute what we're saying without taking the perspective of the mainstream media, which means that you're a media advocate. You're not even playing devil's advocate. You're not being a skeptic. So that's another misconception, is that questioning those of us who are analyzing things in this perspective is somehow skeptical of us. No, you're not skeptical of the mainstream. You're adopting the mainstream non-skeptical perspective, and then you're bringing that to our perspective as though you have some kind of point, which you really would not. Dark Ghost Wind says all these justifications are usually their X. Of course, they would do Y. Reductionism prevents looking at the bigger picture. This is a big thing in Trutherville. Yeah, exactly. I got that one with the chemtrail thing. Like, oh, they're so evil. Why wouldn't they spray aluminum in our faces? That's not an argument. Same commenter says, education and media programming causes you to only see a completely irrational black and white. They either believe wholly the first or wholly the exception, but they can't look past it. Yeah, that would be the main approach here. Mainstream and alt it's a false choice. And both of them assume the fundamental reality of the lie. So you can be mainstream or alternative without actually being close to the truth. That's why truther is a misnomer. They're not truthers. They're alt liars. And if we can call the mainstream believers unwitting liars, then why can't we say the same for truthers? And so I'm very much in favor of calling liars liars. And if they don't like that, well, then defend your claims without resorting to logically fallacious arguments or without relying upon literal lies, misinformation. And challenge us to the same. You know, I'm 100% putting everything out here so it can be challenged. This is the reason why I want to do the book promotion and discuss these things with normies. I'm not trying to get Normieville to adopt my views. I am exposing Normieville as such for the deprogrammed. For those who have already seen through the programming, we need to be able to look at this compartmentalization. It's invisible, but you can reveal it through those who have these different perspectives and how they, in a very predictable way, put themselves into these various boxes. Linda Curtis says, if they would stop all the drills, the psyops would stop. Drills bring the terror. Yeah, I remember that. When people first started noticing that every terror attack had a drill concurrent with it, Alex Jones's damage control line was, these are drills that go live. Like the London subway bombings. 2 subway tunnels, 2 separate bombs. At the same time, there were drills in those tunnels for bombs. And so the line was, oh, those drills went live. Like, what are you saying? Like, if you're a crisis actor, you might actually get killed by the thing? It doesn't make sense. We have seen so many efforts to do damage control to prevent us from arriving at the conclusion that we've arrived at, to prevent us from arriving at this perspective. So it's not about a conclusion like, oh, these 50 events were fake. It's actually about the perspective. Because if you have the wrong perspective, all of your conclusions are going to be wrong. And this is true for alt and mainstream. But the off-world stage perspective is the one inclusive of media fakery and how it's executed and what its purpose is. So our perspective on every event has more information than the alt and mainstream perspectives. And you can't arrive at the right answers if your perspective is skewed or exclusive of those factors that would lead you to the right conclusion. They're blinkered, they're blindfolded, they're hoodwinked, and guard-railed. And we're not. We're disengaged from the program. And again, the program is the false timeline superimposed over the real one, past, present, and future. The fake events in a sequence that are all part of the same fictional universe superimpose over the organic timeline. And if you don't see that, you're programmed. You cannot consider yourself deprogrammed unless you can identify the program in order to step outside of it. You have to see the matrix. All right, well, we'll be back in a bit, likely later on today. I just wanted to follow up with the Climate Trails documentary. So keep an eye on your inbox. I'm going to be writing a review. Thanks for your